context, familial, folkloric, incorporating the dead into a family context, or act as if making it if they had a family, if they didn't have a family. And so what happened was that individuals made quilts, and they made quilts all over the country. And then these quilts, after some years, were gathered, and they took over the mall. So at a time when AIDS couldn't be spoken of, the idea of putting the names of the dead on the national sacred site is a political gesture of some import. And its import, as I say, of making the dead live and making it speak to some, what they took to be injustice, that no one paid attention to these people. And no one did pay attention to them for a long time, as a matter of fact. So this is what you saw. And you see, you see here, we'll show you some details. Remember, the name was actually crucial. The name and some association with the person. Right? Dean Butler, Melvin Ward, right? Michael Soto, right? So of all ethnic groups and connections from all over the country. So that's the Names Project and AIDS. We'll talk about the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo next week when you guys have read The Little Schoolhouse. So I want to do this in some more detail. I'll talk about this more detail later, but I just want to show you the same sort of issues of the disappeared. The gathering of pictures. In this case, they have the names of these pictures as a you don't know where this is before or after the regime fell, but as an indictment of the regime for disappearing these people. So these people, these names and these dead are there too. They lived once, where are they? And some human rights, some violation, as you'll read next week. Some major violations happened. Some 30,000 people were disappeared. And the book you're reading, this little short novel you're reading is about that subject next week. And pictures, they literally didn't know where they were, and they still don't know where many of them are. They were mostly dropped out of airplanes, which is really how they disappeared over the sea. So insofar as you find these, they wash ashore, and people try to identify them. Some were buried in mass graves, and those are more identified. But the Argentinian general's way of disappearing people was really disappearing them. So they were gone, and so this is a recovery. Well, I wanted to show you one last example of this. So that's we've done war, we did disease, we did a political creation of political disappearance, and we did the Holocaust, and now we have another version of modern genocide, which is the Cambodian genocide, in which because it's a fairly unbureaucratic country, we actually could identify they have been able to identify relatively few of the actual dead of Cambodia. But there's a huge project in Cambodia and at Yale University to identify. So these are people who actually were photographed before they were murdered. So they brought into these places, and they were photographed, and then they were killed. Many people were not photographed, but we have the people, the post-Khmer Rouge regime has these pictures. And Chris very kindly projected screenshots of the project. So I recommend that you go to this if you're interested in this kind of memorialization. It's the Cambodia Genocide Project, which lists all these different databases. And if you go there, you can search for photographs on the photography database by a bunch of categories. You can look for children, you can look for women. If you have a name, you can look, if some of these are identified, you can look for these names. Here's the database. And then you could put all sorts of different versions. And then this is the website. I'll just leave this up for a second, but you guys can get this yourselves. And what you see in it is this stuff. It's actually pretty terrifying. These look like pretty normal people, right? Who had really done nothing, and they're brought in there and they're murdered. You know, tortured and murdered. So there are a lot of these. So this is, again, a project, and now it's relevant to the bringing to justice at least some of these people. As you know right now, they're sort of a very complicated mixed tribunal in Cambodia. Some UN, some international jurisprudence, some national jurisprudence. a lot of complaints that not enough people are being prosecuted, but some people are being prosecuted, and these pictures are relevant to that prosecution. So trying to name and trying to bring the dead back connects then to the corpus delicti, body of a crime part, in this context of Cambodia. All right, so let's stop here with the names. Questions for this? Don't tell me that was all clear. You're not paying attention if it is. Yeah.
You mentioned you have some things about the Holocaust Memorial, and I was wondering if, even if you don't explain them all the way, if you could talk about that a little.
I'm sorry?
You mentioned that you had, that you wrote a review and stuff for the Holocaust
Uh-huh.
Memorial. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail what you think about it.
Well, I'll post the article online for you, so you guys can read it. What did I feel about the Holocaust Memorial? You know, I thought that there's a line by Jaco Timmerman, who wrote an important book on the Argentinian disappeared, called Prisoner of No Name, which is, I thought of maybe assigning you guys instead of the little schoolhouse, but it's longer and I didn't. Timmerman has this line saying there's no business like Shoah business. Shoah being the Hebrew word for Holocaust. And there's this sort of slightly, to me, pleasure that this museum evokes in making you think about something horrible. You know, the architectural program you told us you walked in, the elevators are made of heavy steel with bolts. And the architectural guide you says he's meant to be broadly Holocaustal. I thought broadly Holocaustal is sort of an oxymoron. So the idea that this elevator that you're nice to go take to the 8th floor is supposed to sort of somehow mimic a gas chamber, I thought was slightly disgusting. And it's a very coercive museum. That is to say, if you've been there, you go around, you have to go around in a certain way, and it tells one Holocaust story that's really in your face. Now, Yad Vashem is a pretty coercive story too, but it's a slight, at least it's clear it's supposed to be a nationalist Israeli story where you begin with German Jews who were unclear of the concept that you can live outside of Israel, and ends with Israel looking over Jerusalem. So what do you expect in Israel? That's kind of the story you expect. The Holocaust Museum, I mean, that's the national story. But the Holocaust Museum is sort of, I thought, slightly prurient and insistent. And the whole architecture is this sort of vague. It's supposed to be like a concentration camp, you know, with lots of. So I didn't. And then I thought that it kind of mixed up the educational part and the memorial part. So it's kind of a memorial chapel. So there's this part where they're trying to teach you something, but they also sort of want you to vaguely pray. And then right from this chapel is the cafeteria, where they serve Eastern European Jewish food. So you go from the Holocaust to this chapel where you're supposed to sort of pray about it, and then you're supposed to eat, you know, pierogi or whatever. I thought, give me a break. Now there is a problem with what you're supposed to eat in commemorating the Holocaust. I had a colleague here whose family was deported and lived, a French colleague, Jacqueline Lichtenstein. I don't know if you remember her, taught in the French department, and she went back to France, and she said, so she was going to take a train with a bunch of children of survivors to Auschwitz from Paris, and then she said, all these guys were really worried, so what are we supposed to bring to eat on the train? So somehow nothing if you're trying to remember your parents, because they didn't get to bring anything to eat. But you know, being good French people, they brought sausages and pâté and all sorts of good food and so forth for this rather long and miserable plane trip to the east. So there's this sort of weird notion of this kind of how you actually supposed to do this reenactment. And I don't love. I'm fine to have educational places about the Holocaust, and I guess I'm fine to have sort of national worship places about the Holocaust if that's your country. But I don't love the mixing of these two. And the last thing I didn't like about it was, you know. And you get this from Samantha Power. So it's great for us to have this line on the things and never again. But when it actually came, in fact, for the Americans to do something about Rwanda or about Yugoslavia, nothing happened. So here we put this unbelievably fancy monument on our national mall for a crime which we actually didn't commit. And then we do nothing about, these crimes that we actually could do something about. So I thought the whole thing was a little bit in bad faith, and a little bit that it's great to say, you know, it's part of the sort of story, never again will Germans kill Jews in 1940s Germany, Europe. True enough. But anyway, so I mean, my argument is slightly more subtle than all this in the piece, and I'm happy to, you can get it from JSTOR, but I will post it for you guys if you're interested in my rather. But we could argue about this at coffee, not in class. But, yeah.
Are smaller sporadic memorials taking the place of large ones,
Sorry?
or just showing up in addition?
I'm sorry?
Like the smaller memorials, like the tripping stones and the things on the houses.
They're showing up.
Are they just in addition to what's already there, or is this going to be like the new way that?
Well, it's both. It's an interesting question. There was again, this student in our department is working on this. There is a debate, and in Germany, the debate was we needed a big central memorial. So they built this memorial in Berlin. So you have this, which I showed you a picture before, right in the middle of Berlin, and there's an education center under, which is actually a rather good education center. But there are other people who think that sort of having this as a memorial in the middle of your city is fine, but actually the memory of this needs to be more geographically dispersed, is what she argues. And so there's a lot of these individual memorials around Germany. And there are a lot of individual memorials in all sorts of places in this country. I mean, for Native Americans, for place cemeteries. In other words, I think it's an important movement in memorial practice and human rights practice. Yeah. And it's each country is different. In other words,
Yeah.
Hungary, each country has a different version. What all countries do have, and I didn't mention, is the unknown soldier, the sort of idea that, did I say this? The unknown soldier becomes a monument in most countries, including even Russia has one now. In other words, the fact that we have a body representing all bodies is a novelty of modern practice. And the notion of the unknownness being unbearable, it drives much of this human rights inquiry that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Yeah.
Just to follow up about your opinions on the Holocaust museum in DC. Just briefly, I remember they gave you a passport with a name on it.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that as far as what we're discussing and the remembrance and the name?
Well, look, I am sympathetic to the idea of giving you a name with an individual person, look, here's the problem. Here's the issue with not just Holocaust commemoration, but all this human rights commemoration all these things we talked about. You know, I give you this lecture. I says, well, 500,000 people were killed in Cambodia, and another, probably 800,000 in Rwanda, and maybe it was 6 million in the Holocaust, and 1.2 million in Armenia, and you throw out these numbers, and you say, well, that's fine, but basically, it doesn't have a lot of resonance, right? And so the problem in all of these, making all of this real to you, is a problem that takes us back to the beginning of the course when we said, look, yeah, tens of thousands a year brought into slavery, but who gets their head around tens of thousands? So we tell one story. We tell the story of Equiano. So this problem in memory is always a problem of that the great German philosopher I mentioned to you several times is called the arithmetical sublime, which is the question of how do you actually get terror out of large numbers. And he gives the analogy of the pyramid. And he says if you step way back and you see this pyramid, it's kind of big and it impresses you, it's a big pyramid, but you don't have a lot of a sense of what it really takes to build the pyramid at Cheops. And you get really close to it, this level, you see that it's a block. If you were these pyramids, they're gigantic blocks. They're as big as this building. You say, holy cow, someone